The Outer World is something of a hot topic at the moment. People love it. It was designed by the same studio that did Fallout New Vegas, and it is the game everyone thought would be released by Bethesda before we saw Fallout 76 and puked a little in our mouths. Before I start reviewing the Outer Worlds, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that I've enjoyed New Vegas greatly, but it was not the best Fallout game in my eyes. Many people will disagree with this, but in my personal opinion, Fallout 4 was where the series reached its pinnacle. It looked best, it played great, and had everything I had loved from the series plus many improvements I had been hoping for. Our protagonist there was finally voiced and had an actual character. Sure, it did some things wrong, but those were easily fixed with mods. So in my eyes, Fallout 4 is the best Fallout game to date. With that in mind, let's take a look at the Outer Worlds and see what it does right and what it does wrong. The first thing you will notice is that the game does not support Ultrawide in any shape or form. Neither 21:9 nor 32:9 works properly. The devs responded to the numerous requests with the statement that ultra-wide monitors are not popular and the demand is too limited, so they won't bother doing it. This is the laziest, most annoyingly stupid answer I've heard so far from any developer. We are nearing the end of 2019 and some new games are still released without ultra-wide support. It's absolutely ridiculous. The real reason is that The Outer Worlds is yet another shitty console port. I can get any of the Fallout games since Fallout 3, including Fallout 3 as a matter of fact, to run in ultra wide within seconds. Yes, it requires mods, but it works really well and it's easy to do. But back to the review here. I finished the game about 2 weeks ago and no one has been able to make a proper fix for this until then. I haven't checked right now, but I don't really expect something to have changed. Some fixes exist, but they don't work well and don't really get proper aspect ratios in any case. I usually record games in 21:9 for my reviewing, but once I have enough footage I switch to my native 32:9. Unfortunately, this game simply zooms in and cuts off most of the screen in order to fit it. That's how it simulates an ultra wide aspect, by basically zooming into your monitor. This means that everything looks horrible in 32:9 and is absolutely unplayable. On 21:9 it's not quite as bad, but still very much noticeable. This is how I played throughout the game, and I gotta say, for both playthroughs it looked pretty bad, but you do get used to it and it doesn't disturb you that much after some time. Still, it's terrible, and had I known of this in advance I would have not considered this game at all. It would have been an absolute deal breaker for me. You can see the footage for yourself. It feels like the game is a bit zoomed in and almost makes you dizzy at first. And don't even try 32:9, that genuinely made me dizzy because it is so zoomed in and weird. Otherwise the game looks quite nice and runs very well. The facial animations are a bit stiff, but it's okay for the most part. I've had only one crash for the duration of both my playthroughs. My second biggest gripe with the game is the silent protagonist. It would seem that Obsidian are hell-bent on copying their magnum opus known as Fallout New Vegas. They've tried to make a game that borrows as much of it as possible without having to face Bethesda in court. The problem here is that while New Vegas was excellent, it was almost completely like Fallout 3 with a different plot. As much as I hate Bethesda at this point for the greedy bastards they have become, I give credit where credit is due. Fallout 3 was what set the foundation on which New Vegas stands. Yes, it has more content, more decisions, and an overall better plot and map, but when you look at it critically, it's mostly Fallout 3 with minor improvements. My point here is that in my opinion, Obsidian simply do not deserve all the praise they get for their work on New Vegas. Yes, I know they didn't have that much time and overall everyone likes the game, we can't argue with that, but it isn't like they sat down and reinvented the wheel. The game was designed before that and they just had to basically make a sequel based on whatever the first game was. Same engine, basically the same graphics, etc, etc. I'm not gonna go too deep into it. Very few risks were taken and they mostly stuck to the original ideas in terms of gameplay, world building, skills, etc. Why am I telling you all of this? It's because I believe that the Outer Worlds could have been so much better if Obsidian had taken ideas from Fallout 4 as well. First of all, we don't have an open world here at all. Instead, we get multiple maps which we can explore. This limits our exploration significantly. The maps don't really feature any instances which are non-quest related. This is not because there are so many quests, but rather because there aren't enough instances to explore. The maps are simply too small, some more than others. Remember how you had random encounters in the Fallout games, or how depending on who you support and how you act in general, a faction that doesn't like you will send assassins after you, or how there are radio stations and on some host would comment on your latest action actions throughout the wasteland. None of this happens in the Outer Worlds. The game feels like a heavily cut version of Fallout games, not counting 76, which is a cash grab and is a scam of a game. Due to this, we also have very limited types of enemies. But the cutting of corners doesn't end here. Most NPCs look extremely similar to each other. The females never have long released hair, since that makes it easier to model them. Some of you will probably say that many of these problems were existing in Fallout games before as well, but the issue here is that those games were huge. When you have so many NPCs, it's normal to reuse assets and voice actors, and that this is noticeable. This game here, however, The Outer Worlds, is a game with a very small world and thus a very limited amount of NPCs. They should all be better for this. And since I am complaining, let me tell you about the looting situation. This game has way too much individual loot. By this I mean loot that is just scattered around. You know how in most games you find most of the loot in containers, so you can point at a chest, you can see all the stuff inside of it, and you can hold a button or press a button and loot all of it at once, for example. There is always a bit of single stuff scattered in rooms, etc. Stuff that you can aim at individually and pick it up one at a time. This game, however, has way too much of that. The problem with this is that the loot is even highlighted, so you're beckoned to get it, and just ignoring it is too hard to do. Thus, you spend a ton of time aiming at individual things and picking them up, which is tedious but necessary because you need lots of money for this game, and for that you have to loot stuff and sell it. What I did like was how the day and night cycles changed the looks of the game, and it also seemed that some NPCs would change their behavior depending on the time of the day. Now, let's address the RPG aspects of the game. You start by customizing your character, and I have to compliment them on this. The character creator is flexible enough to enable people who like to play around with sliders to go nuts, while also offering a selection of well-designed default faces for those of us who don't want to make one of their own. The skill system is also fairly clear. You get to select some of your attributes during character creation, then as you level up you will be granted skill points and perk points. The skills are sectioned out in larger groups. Within them you have specific individual skills again. For example, a large group is called dialogue, while the individual skill within that group is called, for example, persuade, lie, intimidate. At first you can simply allocate individual points into dialogue and it will improve all of the 3 sub-skills within it. As soon as any of them reach level 50, however, you will have to allocate points into those skills individually if you want to increase them. At different level thresholds, you will receive bonuses for being good at something. For example, investing 40 points into stealth will enable you to pickpocket people, and this is how it goes with all the other skills as well. The perk points are not given at every level and are thus somewhat more valuable. However, unlike in the Fallout games, I found the perks here to be quite boring and uninspired. Most of them feel like a simple stat improvement. I remember how I was looking forward to getting something with my next level up in Fallout. Here nothing really excites me. They didn't do a good job with that. What is original are the flaws. As the game progresses, you are offered different flaws. For example, if you fall from too high too often and take fall damage, the game will offer you a flaw called permanently crippled. If you take it, you'll have your movement speed reduced by 30% and you will not be able to perform dodges anymore. In return, you get a single perk point. You can probably see why this system is a wasted opportunity, given the fact that the perks are so lame and that the flaws are almost always so debilitating that you are rarely justified in accepting such a deal with the devil. As a matter of fact, the game sometimes does not explain the flaws well enough, and I was fooled into accepting one and ended up regretting it for the rest of my playthrough. Oh yeah, there's no way to get rid of them. Even if you reset your character, you get to relocate all your stats, but you cannot remove or replace any flaws. Let me tell you the story of how I got fooled with one of them. As you progress through the game, you are given a cloaking device. Provided you have the correct uniform card, you can enter restricted areas and move around the NPCs without them confronting you about being there. There is a timer for this, and once it passes, you get confronted and have to pass a speech check. If you get the speech check right, the timer refills and the process repeats several times, with each speech check becoming harder and harder to pass. As far as I can tell, your sneaking abilities have no effect on this whatsoever. So once the game offered me a flaw called paranoia, which lowers your personality attributes by 1 point or double that when in restricted areas, as well as while sneaking. So I considered myself in a situation where I thought, okay, restricted areas, I don't do that much, let's accept it. For some reason, however, the game seems to consider every area to be a restricted area, far more than just when you have the aforementioned timer. So if you are anywhere where you could consider you generally shouldn't be, it gives you that penalty. I was actually almost constantly suffering from the double penalty effect. Furthermore, this showcases another issue I have. You can use consumables to improve some skills, but as with the aforementioned flaw from before, they modify your attributes instead of affecting the skills directly. Attributes are the first thing you set up when you create your character, and there are no ways that I know of that allow you to change them after that. Even worse, in most cases, you will have no idea how and which skills are affected by which attribute because you will never deal with them past your first character creation screen. For example, the personality attribute affects your charm, which then affects your personality skill as well as hack, science, and inspiration. It's unnecessarily complicated. I mean, if you think about what I just said, it even sounds like I just said two things that are the same type of skill that are affecting each other. It's crazy. I just missed the good old Fallout way where in order to improve your hack, sneak, etc., all you had to do was read the description of the consumable. In the Outer Worlds, the description tells you of an attribute and you have to check online guides or just experiment in order to figure out which skill group will be affected by this change. It's not done well at all. And while this is unnecessarily complex, other parts are way too simplified. In Fallout, you could get your limbs or head crippled, which led to negative effects unless you healed them. This is missing here for your character. Strangely enough, you can do that to enemies, but only when using a special ability which slows time. So let me tell you about the combat system. I found it to be quite satisfying. Since I've mentioned that slowing time skill, I will start with that. It's actually quite nice. While activated, you can hit parts of the enemies, and this will cause special crippling effects on them. This is very convenient and a way better solution than VATS from Fallout, since I never enjoyed the whole thing where I just click and everything goes automatically. Here, it's more like Max Payne, for example. Of course, I'm aware of the fact that some people really did enjoy VATS, so they won't like the slowing time as much as I do, but for me personally, this worked really well. The weapons are nice. You can upgrade them by adding attachments or tinkering with them. The latter is how the game describes a function which enables you to increase their base stats. Tinkering. This is pretty nice because it allows you to level up any weapon by up to 5 levels above your own, thus negating the need to replace it when you get stronger. Weapons do degrade, so you have to scrap others for parts and use those to repair them. You also have science weapons, which usually involve a pretty interesting effect along with the ability to scale with your science stat. Depending on how you level your character, those weapons will either be awesome or absolutely useless to you, and since damage relies heavily on the science perks and the science skill, this will be even more so. There are also more rare weapons with slightly better stats, as well as some named ones. Armor is also a thing in this game. You only have 2 armor slots, one of which is your headgear. The choice is relatively limited and a standard fare altogether. Some armor is lighter but weighs less and provides less protection, while other armors are heavier and provide better defensive stats, but at the cost of much higher weight. As you progress, you will find companions who will not only enhance your skills with theirs, but can also unlock some perks of their own and special attacks. Those companions will sometimes talk to you or other NPCs and offer some unique quests. They are nice additions and can be quite useful in combat. This is where I want to mention some of the politically correct bullshit in this game. If you've watched my videos, you know that I hate that kind of stuff with passion. There is only one romantic storyline within the whole game, and that storyline is between your first companion, who is female, and another female NPC. Luckily, the game lets you stop that shit as soon as it starts, but I can't just ignore it in my review. It adds nothing to the game to know that one of the characters is a lesbian. At some point, the lesbian even talks about watching a show with lesbians in it. Could this be any more cringy? I am okay with having homos and transvestites in games when it actually works. The latest example is the transvestite in a game I've reviewed lately called AI: The Somnian Files. There, the trans guy played a very unique informant and was likable. He kept making inappropriate jokes towards the protagonist, and it was both entertaining as well as useful in terms of fleshing out the character and his eccentric nature. The Outer World does none of that. They just want to mark the "do we have a minority in the game" box as done. This kind of political correctness has nothing to do in games. I can somewhat understand it in games where your character can have a romantic relationship with an NPC, and since you can play as both male or female, you can attempt to appeal to the gays as well as the heterosexuals. It's a smart decision because that way you include the minorities and thus increase the chance of being liked by everyone. It makes sense. After all, you want to sell the game to as many people as possible. But this here serves nothing, and this should not happen. I'm sure that the 3 lesbians who are playing these kind of games will not be deterred just because there isn't an obviously lesbian character. And that was just a joke, but you get my point. If you're going to appeal to someone, why not appeal to everyone? What about the 100 genders? What about Apache helicopters? See what I mean? Political correctness is bullshit and should not be part of gaming culture, period. Now that I got that off my chest, let me mention a few more minor things that I did enjoy. First and foremost, the humor. That's actually something we see less and less often, and I really like it. No matter how you play, there will always be enough funny stuff happening around you. Things get really hilarious if you decide to make your character an idiot by lowering their intelligence at the start of the game. This actually unlocks a special dialogue option, and it is glorious. You even get several special endings, which are really funny. Your companion, as well as other NPCs, react to your stupidity, and it just creates a bunch of hilarious situations. Replaying the game as an idiot was an absolute must for me, and I can't recommend it enough. Another thing that I did enjoy was the fact that your dialogue skills are powerful tools. You get tons of speech checks, which almost always offer some kind of stat check as well, making them more complex and interesting. It is entirely possible to talk, hack, or lockpick your way around difficult encounters. Sometimes you have a locked door which requires a really high lockpicking skill, but you could just hack a terminal next to it to unlock it that way. Or you could pickpocket the key from someone. In some cases you can even convince someone to go and open it for you. These solutions aren't always available, but when they happen to be there, it feels like a really good level design. On the other hand, the game lets you make seemingly important choices from time to time, yet you never see proper consequences to those. They are just told to instill images. For example, one of the first choices is where to redirect the power of a power plant. There are 2 encampments and one will suffer greatly if left in the dark. The problem is, when you do it, almost nothing changes. Instead of one place becoming barren and the other increasing in size, we just end up seeing how both places remain populated in the same way they were before. It's pretty disappointing. Let me briefly address the story. It's quite lame. You are a clean slate. A guy who has been frozen in suspended animation for hundreds of years. You're saved by an outlaw scientist and escape with him. The colonies are all controlled by a board of corporations. The worlds you visit are mostly dystopian, and the people within them little more than slaves of those corporations for which they work 7 days a week. Only the most productive workers get healthcare, etc. Your main motivation is to go back where you were frozen and save the rest of your frozen fellows, but you get a lot of freedom and can change the whole outcome of this plan in many ways. Good, bad, stupid, it's all up to you. That's the positive side of the story. The negative side, on the other end, is the fact that you never really feel an attachment to anything. Since our character does not speak or show any character traits unless you make him an idiot, it feels like you're controlling a sock puppet. Are the other frozen people your friends? Do you feel gratitude towards the scientist who saved you? Or would you be pissed at him for waking you up in this terrible colony? Who knows? The game gives you nothing. It's almost left to us to build our own adventure, and that doesn't really appeal to me. And it's where I feel like many RPG devs miss the mark. Think of a good movie, a good book, and subsequently a good game. They're always defined by their story first. Gameplay and graphics are important, but those things can be healed by a great story. For example, you could start a really old movie and still enjoy it because it tells an excellent story. Old books anyway. Old games exist that still are really good to play. A game with shitty graphics and bad gameplay can still be remedied by a great story. It's true that you can leave the story to the player, but that's just lazy and stupid. And it's also exactly what happened here. They didn't even bother to give us any information. No loved ones are mentioned. Who are frozen? Nothing. Our character is literally an empty and bland puppet that we get to control. Enough about the story, or rather, mostly lack thereof. Let me tell you about something else that really grinds my gears. Your crew and you essentially travel to different planets, and you get to select which they are from a celestial map screen. Some are locked at the beginning. The issue I have with this is that many of these places never actually unlock till the end of the game. You look at the map and at first think to yourself, wow, this game has a lot of content I did not expect, but almost half of all the places never become accessible. This is probably planned for some DLCs or a sequel, but it's nonsense either way because it's right there and it's just, you can't go there. Another annoying thing is that many of the dialogue options lead to the same responses. That's pretty baffling because in some cases you get the same responses after a speech check as you would after a normal response that was not related to the speech check. And I'm not talking when you fail the check. Not to mention that oftentimes NPCs you've just met who should not know your companions will address them by name as if they knew them, so this is kind of weird. And of course, last but not least, I absolutely hated the ending. Don't worry, I won't spoil it, but I will say that it ends with a sequel bait. And not as in the story's resolved, but there's a promise of more. No, instead it cuts the story in the middle and promises to finish it later. It felt as though I was playing an episodic game. Did they run out of money and decide to end it there? I can't tell. What I did like was the fact that there are no in-game purchases or any other such nonsense. I do worry that we'll see some cut content appear as DLC, but I'm glad that it's not worse than that. So, is The Outer Worlds a game you should play? The short answer answer is yes. I know I tore it a new one, but there's a lot here that I would love to see improved upon in the future, but it's a good start. It doesn't fill the Fallout shaped hole in my heart, but it distracted me from it, and that's really something. They need to add a lot more content to the game, a voice acted character, much better story, preferably not related to this one if possible, no political correctness, and an open world with lots of things to discover. Not to mention that it needs to support ultra-wide. Why aren't they doing this? It's still worth playing and quite a lot of fun, but not nearly what a Fallout game used to be in most aspects. If I absolutely had to compare it to New Vegas would win easily here. We've seen that they can do better, so I'm hopeful. While flawed, this is still an excellent RPG, which honestly reminds me a bit more of the good Mass Effect games rather than the Fallout games, but that just might be me. This critical review is now over. If you found it enjoyable, you should definitely take a look at my other ones, since my channel is still quite small. I can't monetize it at all, so if you feel like you would like to support me, I'd be very grateful if you checked my Patreon link in the description. I also post links to all the free games I can find on the internet over there, so even if you cannot support me financially, you should still check it out regularly because there are constantly free games to be had, some of which are really nice ones. In any case, thanks a lot for watching and have a great day.